Here we are still in Concept 52. We wanted to take a break before we look at the terrestrial biomes. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time. We don't have the time to spend on all of these biomes. We're not taking an ecology course, which is where you would learn more details, but we do want to look at just some brief mentioning and information about all of these biomes. Terrestrial biomes can be characterized by distribution, precipitation, temperature, plants, and animals. So you're probably familiar with some of these words. This is some stuff you've probably studied ever since, say, elementary school. So let's briefly take a look at some of these biomes. We'll start with the tropical forest. Tropical forest, as far as distribution, mainly going to be around the equator and the areas directly north and south of the equator. That's where you're going to get those warm conditions that stay constant pretty much throughout the year. It's where you're going to get tremendous amounts of rainfall. Rainfall is relatively constant, and there is something called a dry tropical forest where the rainfall isn't constant, but it's still fairly consistent and heavy, and the temperature is high year-round, 25 to 29 degrees Celsius, with little seasonal variation. Again, if you live at the equator, you don't really have a summer and a winter and fall and spring. It's basically the same weather pretty much all year round. Tropical forests are vertically layered. We can look at different ecosystems from the bottom of the forest floor all the way up to the tops of the trees, and competition for light is very intense. There are so many plants trying to grow, they basically are battling for sunlight. Tropical forests, we know, are home to millions of different animal species, including an estimated 5 to 30 million that have still been undescribed: insects, spiders, other arthropods. Every time we go in to study the tropical rainforest, we find new insects, new creatures that we haven't found before. The problem is rapid human population growth is destroying huge sections of tropical forests. So look in the green here. Again, most tropical rainforests tend to be clustered around the equator. This would be a tropical rainforest in Borneo where you might find orangutans and other cool creatures. But a lot of this land has been changed by human activity. A lot of the trees have been cleared and chopped down for agriculture, and this is one of the types of biomes that we're losing a great deal of. Let's go the opposite direction. Let's get really hot and dry. If we go to the deserts, they occur in bands near 30 degrees north and south of the equator. This is where all of the moisture has come out of the air, and now we have the cooler, drier air coming back down to the earth. And in the interior of certain continents, like some of the deserts in North America are sort of toward the interior of the continent. Precipitation is very low, highly variable, generally less than 30 centimeters per year. 30 centimeters is not a lot of rainfall. Deserts can be very hot, but they can also be very cold, particularly at night. So they tend to have fairly wide swings, and that is in part due to the lack of precipitation and moisture. If you're going to live in the desert, you got to be tough. You got to have certain adaptations. A plant in the desert has got to be well adapted to not dry out, to store water, to reduce the leaf surface area, to avoid sunburn and problems. Common desert animals, of course, lizards, snakes, scorpions, lots of them are nocturnal, meaning they basically hang out in their burrow in the middle of the hot day, and they don't come out till it's nicer at night, cooler at night. So a lot of them are nocturnal type creatures. Urbanization and conversion to irrigated agriculture has reduced the biodiversity of some of these deserts. Think about a place like Las Vegas, Nevada, which is basically desert, and look what we've done to Las Vegas, Nevada. We have a huge city in the middle of Las Vegas, and we pump millions of gallons of water into that area. We've actually drained parts of the Colorado River and Lake Mead just for that purpose, to water the golf courses in Las Vegas. So it's kind of weird to think what we've done to this desert area to build and maintain beautiful golf courses. That's pretty difficult to do, and we use a lot of water to do it. So deserts have been changed quite a bit by mankind as well. Here's a good example of a desert in the southwestern United States. You look at the light tan bands, and you see like where the tropical rainforests were kind of right above and below the equator. If you go another step above and another step below, that's where you get these dry areas where the deserts tend to be. Next we can go to the savanna, which is a type of grassland. Savannas can be found near the equator and sub-equatorial regions. In a savanna, precipitation is seasonal. In other words, you get a decent amount of rain during part of the year, but the other part of the year is pretty dry. Temperature averages are 24 to 29 degrees, but is pretty seasonal. Again, you're going to have a winter and a summer. You're going to have a cold part of the year and a warm part of the year. And savannas are primarily dominated by grasses and what we call forbs. You won't find a lot of trees or forest. It's mainly going to be different types of grasslands. Most of them are fire adapted and tolerant of seasonal drought. So most of them can get through a season that's very dry as long as they have a little bit of water at some point during the year. Lots of different land animals like wildebeest, zebras, lions, hyenas make their home here in the grasslands in the savannas. And humans again have had an effect. Fire set by humans sometimes help maintain this biome, and other activity is detrimental to the biome. So there are some cases where human activity is helpful, some where it's not. And of course, when I think of savanna, the first place I think of is Kenya in Africa, and some of the cool animals that live there like giraffes and zebras and elephants. Again, you can take a look at the yellow areas for savannas. Next biome we want to look at is called a chaparral. A chaparral occurs in mid-latitude coastal regions on several continents. We do have chaparral here in North America. There's also chaparral in the Mediterranean. Precipitation is highly seasonal. You'll have pretty rainy, wet winters, but usually pretty hot, dry summers. Summer is pretty hot, 30 degrees Celsius plus. Fall and winter and spring are pretty cold, 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. The chaparral is basically all shrubland and scrubland, some grasses, a few trees, lots of smaller sort of trees, not a lot of forest or anything like that. Animals would be amphibians, birds, reptiles, some small mammals, a few browsing type mammals like deer and pronghorn antelope. And humans have reduced chaparral areas through agriculture and urbanization. If you want to see chaparral, you might head out toward California. You would see some cool chaparral out in California as well as other areas. So if you look toward these little gray areas here, kind of hard to see on the map, in Australia, the southern tip of Africa, northern Africa, and parts of around, Italy and around the oceans here, and then in parts of North America you can find chaparral. Temperate grasslands are sort of similar to savannas, just slightly different weather conditions. Found on many continents, precipitation is highly seasonal again. Winters tend to be pretty darn cold, 10 degrees below 0 Celsius and dry. Summers are hot, near 30 degrees Celsius and fairly wet. So you have these big seasonal swings. Again, they're dominated by plants, dominated by grasses and forbs, drought and fire resistance. Large grazing animals such as wild horses and bison and pronghorn antelope, and a lot of little small rodents and creatures like groundhogs and prairie dogs that live in the soil below the grasslands. A lot of grasslands, particularly in the United States, are no longer around. They have been converted to farmland. But if you go up to the northern parts of the United States and into Canada, you can still find wide swaths of grasslands. This would be in Saskatchewan, Canada. But you can see there's a big section of the United States that used to be temperate grassland, but that's also the section of the United States that for the most part we have turned into agricultural land nowadays. The next biome we want to look at is a northern coniferous forest, or the taiga. The taiga is in northern North America and Eurasia. It's the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. Now, if you live here in Texas, like you and I do in Waxahachie or Tyler, you may have never really seen or been familiar with taiga, but it is a huge section of our planet. Precipitation varies. Some taiga areas, northern coniferous forests, have periodic droughts. Others, especially near the coast, tend to be pretty wet. Winters can be very cold and summers can be pretty hot. Say for example Siberia in Russia, the winters can get down to negative 50 degrees Celsius, which is pretty darn cold, and then up to about 20 degrees Celsius in the summer. Lots of coniferous trees like pine tree, spruce, fir, hemlock. The shape of these trees is important because these areas tend to get a lot of snow, and the cone-shaped trees help get rid of that snow, help it drop off, keep it from accumulating and snapping their branches off. Lots of living creatures here, lots of migratory birds, large mammals such as moose and bears and Siberian tigers. Some of these areas of our world have been changed quite a bit by man because of logging. We have cut down tremendous numbers of trees in some of these forest areas. So this would be in Norway, but if you look at the map, you can see a huge chunk of our Earth that's covered in these northern coniferous forests, or taiga. Temperate broadleaf forest. Temperate means, if you look at temperate, you're thinking weather conditions that are not quite as hot or quite as cold. Broadleaf would be the trees that lose their leaves in the fall, like oak trees, maple trees, and the like. These can be found in various areas of the world. Significant amounts of precipitation fall during all seasons as rain or snow, so it tends to be fairly wet throughout the entire year. Winters average around 0 degrees Celsius, and summers can be hot and humid near 35 degrees Celsius. You can find, again, in any forest, you can find vertical layers of different sorts of ecosystems from the bottom of the trees all the way up to the tops. And vertical layers are dominated by deciduous trees in northern hemispheres. So in North America, you're going to get a lot of trees that lose their leaves in the fall, like oak trees, elm trees, maple trees. In Australia, these types of forests are dominated by an evergreen tree called a eucalyptus. Tons of mammals and birds and insects and reptiles live in these areas, and in many parts of our world in the northern hemisphere it gets pretty cold in these forests in the winter, so a lot of the animals hibernate. So there are bears and squirrels and other creatures that hibernate over the winter. Lots of these forest areas have been heavily impacted by man. A lot of them have been cut down and settled, and we've built roads and highways and cities, but some of them are still pretty much like they were hundreds of years ago. So here is Tennessee, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. This one's in North Carolina, but in Tennessee it looks very similar in autumn. So you can see big chunks of our country are in this broadleaf forest, and they can be quite beautiful. If you've ever traveled up to the Carolinas and Tennessee and go to the national parks, it's pretty amazing sight, pretty beautiful. Next, let's talk about the tundra. The tundra is a large swath of land that happens to be in the Arctic areas of the world. The alpine tundra exists on high mountain tops in other parts of the world, but we're talking about cold, dry areas, normally far up north, low precipitation. Winters can be very cold, negative 30 degrees, and summers are not very warm, and they tend to be very short. We have something in the tundra called the permafrost, which is a portion of the soil that stays permanently frozen and never thaws out. If you were going to try to dig a post hole in the permafrost, you'd have a hard time. You're only going to be able to dig a couple of inches down into the soil before you hit solid ice, frozen soil that never thaws, even in the summer. It doesn't get warm enough for long enough for that soil to thaw out except for a few inches. And so that helps to keep water from being able to get down further. It keeps plant roots from being able to grow down further. And this really affects what can live there. The vegetation tends to be very small plants, mosses, grasses, little shrubs, a few tiny little trees and lichen. And the creatures that live there tend to be fairly small as well: birds, grazers, predators. There are some large creatures that live in these areas or visit these areas and migrate in and out, like caribou, reindeer, wolves, foxes, muskox, but they sometimes don't spend the entire year there. They just migrate in and out to other areas. Not a lot of humans live in the tundra areas of the world, but we do have a lot of mineral and oil exploration, and so there are some cases where we have done some damage to this part of the world because we've gone in and dug up minerals or drilled for oil and that type of thing. Here's a good example in Alaska, Denali National Park. This is in the autumn, and so you can see the tundra. Not a lot of large plants there. Everything tends to be low to the ground, and remember, they can't have very deep roots because of the permafrost. So hard to see on the map. Sorry about that. Sometimes my little mouse pad is a little sensitive. Hard to see on the map here, the tundra, but it's going to be in the northern parts of the world. They kind of have it just in white up here along the northern edges of the world. Alright, we're going to take a quick break right there. So that's some of the land biomes, the terrestrial biomes. Of course, that's probably something you've already studied a little bit. I wouldn't make you know the exact numbers. Like, I wouldn't make you know the exact number of centimeters of rainfall that a desert gets, but you need to know the general changes from one biome to the next. We'll take a break. We'll talk about some of the water, the aquatic biomes, right when we get back.